Please show your support with a like, subscribe, or contribution to either the YouTube or Patreon page. Incompetence, impracticality, corruption, and failure. Sometimes not such a bad thing. Written and read by Jeremy Boggess. Please note, in the following, I am describing both those that I do and those that I do not sympathize with, along with many in between, and with much of the same general description. When reading this, please consider both those that you may agree with as well as those that you may not. It appears to me that a sizable portion, but not all, of the more well-known leaders and movements currently influencing our world seem to be, with various degrees, exhibiting incompetence, impracticality, corruption, failures, or a combination of all the above. Movements stretch and expand across borders now like never before in history. Officially, certain nations are generally in opposition to other nations. National boundaries are present, of course, but to me, they seem to have less of an influence over general populations than compared to the past, as well as compared to past conflicts. Within those officially opposing nations, cross-border sympathies seem to be aligning with each other publicly and visibly more today than has ever been seen before. Many pundits, commentators, and ordinary citizens in many parts of the world seem to have more sympathy with another regime or ideology found in what was traditionally considered an opposing nation than what is currently recognized in their own. It appears to me that various societies and governments are under siege or subversion from inside and that which extends beyond their national boundaries. Movements and leaders, in general, have more cross-border and international influence now than any other time in history. In addition to this, many countries appear to be under siege or subversion from those who would seek to control or subvert their population for their own personal or their followers' benefit, rather than the benefit of a society as a whole. While influence and movements appear to have more of an impact across borders today than compared to the past, they also appear to have less of a formal command structure when comparing the current size to that of the past. Although more interconnected in the world today, having more of a decentralized command structure than in the past can also make certain aspects more chaotic. And those that are supposed to have more of a formal command structure are finding themselves increasingly ignored or openly defied within the ranks, in comparison to that of their past. It seems to me, while there are more opportunities for movements on many sides to be interconnected in the world today, most movements seem to have a relatively weaker leadership today in comparison to that of their leadership and size in the past. The current state of the world, like many people, has me a bit worried, and it honestly hurts me to see the possible paths that we may be on. Most of the more probable paths for the world and humanity do not have a particularly good outcome for humanity. Publicly visible civil unrest is not only spreading among those countries that are considered more democratic, but also among those countries that are considered to be more authoritarian. Many nations, cultures, and civilizations in these moments of crises are becoming more isolated and competitive in certain aspects rather than cooperative. Authoritarian regimes, international groups, and movements are making bold moves, isolating their power or becoming more powerful. Even those governments that have been traditionally seen as less authoritarian and are considered to be more led by their general populace seem to be censoring or even in some instances cutting off modes of communications. Disturbingly, in some cases, even those countries that are considered to be less authoritarian and more democratic are beginning to attempt to isolate the flow of information. Sometimes chaos, change, or uncertainty can be more frightening to the overall populace of a society than a known darkness. We must be ever vigilant, no matter the side, to the feeling of need or lack in a society. These feelings are often the nursery of radicalism in a society, and chaos being its opportunity for advancement. Need or lack in a society is a most powerful means for enlisting followers into extremist or radical ideologies. It is this that is often and most ignored until it is too late. Once indoctrinated into extremism or radicalism, those individuals become the prime hunting ground for the opportunist. While there are those that claim that they want to find unity or advancement of altruistic goals, they in reality are using their influence to create more polarization and power for themselves or the radical cause. Polarizations seem to be opening up and growing in many societies more than receding. Extremism and radicalization on both the right and left of the political spectrum seem to be gaining more of a foothold over societies in the world. Throughout history, to support their views, the extreme right and left have reported what could be considered misleading information. However, disturbingly, in the past years, this misleading information is becoming increasingly more mainstream with destructive results. There are many, on many opposing sides and positions, taking actions claiming to protect freedoms or security. But unfortunately, in my view, many but not all are looking in the end to promote and persuade their view or control on others rather than protection. This is unfortunate because, in my opinion, the original concern may be valid until it is co-opted and corrupted by the extremist, radical, or opportunist. In these times, it seems to me both those that falsely accuse and those who actually take part in these actions are avoiding the appropriate consequences for those actions. Some, on either side, may also argue and accuse the other position of lies, cheating, intimidation, or a myriad of deceptions. To this, we must ask ourselves, are individuals on both sides being deceived to choose between whose ultimate goals are to enrich themselves or their cohorts? No matter the current topic of discussion or which position of the argument you subscribe to, it is important that we ask ourselves, why is there such a disconnect between what many personally believe and what is the real reality of what is actually happening? Logic would say that if a fact in an argument is so obvious, then why is so much of the population of the world still so divided? Unfortunately, much is often believed or not by opinion and not facts. For many, the flow of information is often voluntarily or involuntarily one-sided. For many, the validity of an argument is believed or not believed depending on which side of the argument they sympathize with. It is important that the validity of accusations be investigated objectively. Whether by choice or deception, much of the world is subscribing to their own version of reality. Logically, this cannot continue and can be inevitably headed for an uncomfortable conclusion. How uncomfortable or destructive the conclusion will affect the future can be decided by the reality of the current chain of events. Opinions, specifically difference of opinions, are always debatable. The interpretations of facts between peoples can also be debatable. However, the facts in themselves are not debatable. The denial of facts by the extremist or radical has generally led to not only an uncomfortable conclusion for them, but also for those around them. It is important that we attempt to bring those whom we can back to reality. Unfortunately, bringing people back from a disconnect of reality can be difficult. Fear, rather than hope, is more powerful in forming a person's perception of reality. It seems to me that it is fear rather than hope that is driving the decisions on various positions of arguments and conflicts in the world. In my own personal opinion, the collective society of the world as a whole, not to be confused with the individual, is using their inner strength or personal spirituality towards defense of attack or even attacking, rather than using it to build up or elevate. It appears to me that we have moved away from truly building or even its pretext to outwardly tearing down. I believe many have become overly focused on disagreements instead of even trying to pursue those few agreements that seem to exist. Unfortunately, like every mortal human being, none of us can be completely immune from the impacts and consequences of these current conflicts in the world, whether we take part in them or not. However, a question still remains. How are those that are still able to do what they are doing, despite these facts being pointed out by the opposition? So, we can ask ourselves, how are some in certain areas able to still succeed? Yes, it could be said that there are some advancements by one over another in many different disputes in the world. But in my personal opinion, the many sides to the many contrary positions of disputes in the world seem not to be fully utilizing what should be, obviously, their full or possible potential. In consideration of what has already happened in many different disputes in the world, both internally and externally in various nations and cultures, you would expect many to be further along in their progress than where they currently are. I believe, in many instances, but not all, the positional advancements or successes of different arguments in the world can be attributed to more of a result of the failure of the opposition rather than their own success. Still, with all the chaos that comes with internal dissent and the testing of boundaries, I believe it is important to remember that sometimes we need to test the current normal boundaries to prevent stagnation. Preventing stagnation helps us survive and advance into the future. The careful testing of our boundaries helps us with the ability to become stronger for those tests that will inevitably happen in the future. However, I also believe it is even more important that we prevent those from falling into the trap of radicalism. Sometimes, those that do follow the path of extremism or radicalism may believe the more extreme or radical may be the best ones to combat the opposing extreme or the only ones best capable of getting things done. Unfortunately, they often do not realize that the environment of extremism or radicalization can and often encourages more extremism and radicalization on both sides. This back and forth of extremism and radicalization often intensifies. These situations can often and at the same time feed that which lured or led the opposition to the opposing extreme in the first place. Many are in essence feeding those opposing views that they wish to combat. So, we ask ourselves, are we directly or indirectly contributing to the problem? Are we contributing to the problem by our acceptance of incompetence, impracticality, corruption, and failures? But yet, while it is true that these incompetencies, impracticalities, corruptions, and failures should be concerning, maybe it would be worse if we did not have them. Now, I am not saying that this is a positive thing. I am saying that when they are incorporated into the negative, they may make the negative not so bad. With these complications incorporated into the more negative endeavors in the world, there can be more of a probable chance of unfortunate events becoming less of a reality, or at least less intense. Therefore, ironically, I sometimes wonder if it is not for the better or such a bad thing that either position is unable to fully realize or complete their full fantasy of goals. My immediate reasoning for this is that the one that could fully reach their fantasy of goals might be the one that I fear. And even if it were the one that I agree with, there is always the danger that the side that I agree with would see their success as justification to go to the extreme. The question is, what will be left when we do emerge from the other end of these challenging times? This is what concerns me the most for our physical world. What will be left of our world after we emerge from the other end? Do we resign ourselves to a fatalistic approach, attempting nothing, and let it continue to fester? Or do we at least try to make an attempt or effort to save or restore what we can? Although the journey will be hard and rough for us, I have to hope that we will come out of the other end relatively unscathed. And thank you again for your like, subscribe, or contribution to either the YouTube or Patreon page.